Well, it's another day and another time where people are complaining about cards in Magic the Gathering over on Twitter, and I think it's probably a good idea for us to go ahead and address one of the main cards that people are just angry about in Commander. And yes, it is in Commander. There are a few people who I don't think that this conversation is specifically about Commander, but I'm gonna be honest, I play Standard, I play Modern, I play Pioneer, and there's only one format where I see this card ever being a problem. So let's go ahead and talk about the monkey in the room, Farewell. So this is a conversation that happens on Twitter, like once every week or 2 weeks. It happens a lot, but I'm gonna be honest, I'm actually kind of on board with the conversation that happens with this card. So for those who don't know, this particular conversation this time is being started by Jake and Joel MTG. They said this is one of the most toxic cards ever printed, and it makes every single game it appears in less fun. The game is worse off because this card exists. Now, I have some thoughts on this. My main thought, of course, is that I actually kind of agree. I do find this card to be incredibly toxic in the games it shows up in, and I've got a few arguments as to why, but I want to quickly address some of the counter arguments that I've seen in the comments of this and bring up some of the stuff that I've seen in this conversation over and over and over again. So one of the main things I've been seeing is people going, in Commander, most of the cards and mechanics are not fun, or half the cards and mechanics are not fun, and it's, if you don't play any interaction, everybody can be uninterrupted. And I kind of agree with this. I agree with the spirit of the stake. It's the reason why I've pointed out that decks need to run more interaction. I've even made guides to running more interaction in Commander, because I believe that you need to play more cards that stop your opponents from doing things. But it's the way those cards feel to play. So if I'm playing 1v1 with you, if you and I are playing competitive Magic the Gathering, then I actually don't care what type of effects you bring to the table. I don't care if you're playing Storm, I don't care if you're playing Control, I don't care what type of deck you bring, even if it's Infect, because when we are playing 1v1 Magic the Gathering, we are both trying to win at the strongest ability we possibly can. This is how Standard works, this is how Modern works, this is how every format that is not Commander works. Commander, on the other hand, has a little bit of a different story. You see, in a game of Commander, unlike 1v1 Magic, yes, everybody is trying to win. However, it is a splice between a board game and a competitive card game, which means there are some sacrifices that are made in the design process for any deck. You are trying to not only play something that you find fun, but also that other people at the table will find fun. And there are some things that people at the table don't generally find super fun, and that's not being allowed to play Magic the Gathering or games lasting 2 to 3 hours. Sometimes we enjoy those super long games that we can tell stories about, but when we're talking about games of Commander, most people would like a game to be anywhere between 5 to 8 turns. If it's not CDH, maybe a little longer. Nobody wants to be there for the 3-hour slogfest. If you are that person, I cannot help you, and neither can God. But why do people have issues with Farewell? It's just like some other cards we have in Commander. It's just like Cyclonic Rift. It gets rid of all the non-land permanents, except not really. There are some differences. So with a well-timed Cyc Rift, you should just win the game. This is a card that doesn't slow games down, generally speaking. This is a card that blows everybody out, and it's asymmetrical, so the player gets to win the game. Yes, people get salty about Cyclonic Rift, and I understand them not liking the card. I only run it in Sauron, because when I play that deck, I plan on being the villain of the game. It's the entire theme of a deck like that. But generally speaking, if I play an asymmetrical board wipe like this, I am going to be trying to win the game directly afterwards. There's only one scenario in which playing Farewell wins you the game directly afterwards. Well, there's two scenarios. One is if you're playing Super Friends decks. So let's say you're playing a Super Friends deck with Nicol Bolas Dragon God. You use Farewell, you blow all the creatures off the board, and now suddenly you have the ability to ult Nicol Bolas. Nobody has a legendary creature or planeswalker because Farewell cleared them all out. Now you win. The other scenario is when you have it combined with something like Teferi's Protection or Clever Concealment, when you can make sure that you are unaffected by this card when you play it. Again, these are scenarios where the person who plays it turns Farewell into an asymmetrical board wipe and then allows themselves to win the game right afterwards, making it more in line with the Cyclonic Rift. yeah, there's more people that are going to get salty over the Psych Rift than the Farewell, but truthfully speaking, I think the root of the problem always has been when you play this card, it slows the game down, when you play Farewell specifically. If we look at some cards that are similar to Farewell that are not quite Cyclonic Rift, these are cards people don't generally seem to complain about. Let's look at Planar Cleansing. It destroys all non-land permanents. Surely that's similar, except not really. Yes, it costs the same amount. It's a 6-mana board wipe that gets rid of everything on the board, but it doesn't stop reanimation players from playing the game, for instance. It doesn't stop people from advancing their own board states afterwards. It allows grave triggers. Even things like Solemn Simulacrum are allowed to operate in a world where Planar Cleansing happens. People are not fully blown out and basically resetting their games. Again, if you are not using a Teferi's Protection or playing a Super Friends deck, Farewell is a board reset, like a full board reset. Planar Cleansing, yes, it resets the board, but it does not reset the game. If you look at a card like Merciless Eviction, surely this is the same thing. It's got such similar text. It costs the same amount, except there's a problem. Merciless Eviction makes you choose one. There's actually a layer of decision-making involved in playing Merciless Eviction. 9 times out of 10, when Farewell is played, the person generally just says, exile all everything, and we go back to stage 1. Charizard is a Magic the Gathering card that makes you play a subgame. I'm playing Farewell. We are now playing a subgame of Magic the Gathering where everybody who's not green has lost all of their ramp, and everybody who is a graveyard player has lost all of their advantage, and everybody who is a storm player is completely set back. Not set back. They're just not recovering. The Storm player's just not recovering from that. Cards like Merciless Eviction make you actually make a choice. Cards like Austere Command make you actually make a choice. Do you want to blow up all creatures? Then you're giving up the ability to get rid of the artifacts and the enchantments. Do you want to get rid of only the little creatures and then get rid of the artifacts? Then the enchantment player may still be able to go out. Like, cards like this give you a degree of choice and give you some ability to make decisions, whereas cards like Farewell, there is no decision making. The card just happens and then everybody feels bad, and the game is, in most situations, reset to a point where people are now playing the slowest version of Magic the Gathering humanly possible. Now again, this argument doesn't actually work if we're talking about Super Friends decks. Super Friends decks are playing like 15 board wipes because the people who play them, their moms really didn't love them all that much, I don't think, with a few exceptions. But the Super Friends player, they're doing this as part of their integral strategy to win the game. They are resetting everybody so that their planeswalkers are not getting interacted with. Yes, it feels bad to have that happen, but in this case, a card like Farewell is advancing their board state as opposed to setting everybody back. But one of the other arguments that I've heard that I do not agree with this card is, why not just play Counterplay? The two instances of Counterplay that people talk about are, one, not over-advancing your board state, which I don't agree with entirely. In a game of Commander, over-advancing your board state isn't a concept you can really quantify. So if I'm playing Pioneer with somebody, I know what over-advancing my board state means, because I know what my opponent has in their deck, generally speaking. If I'm playing my Golgari mid-range deck, and I drop Liliana of the Veil down, and my opponent has 3 creatures because I'm fighting like Boros Convoke or something, they've got the ability to clear out my Liliana, and my Liliana's not really doing a whole lot for me at that point. I'm over-advancing my board state, I'm not putting myself in a good position. But in a game of Commander, the amount of variables there are is nigh infinite. It's incredibly difficult to ascertain when you are advancing your board state too far and when you're not. And typically the variables you have to worry about are in your opponent's hand or in their deck. Let's say that you're the one who just has a perfectly big board and your opponent top decks the Farewell. Did you over-advance your board state? Did you make a did you make a decision error? I'd argue no, you died to dumb luck. The other argument that I see, though, is you should run Counterplay, but the problem is, Counterplay to Farewell only exists in 2 colors. It exists really in blue, and it exists in white. In white, you have things like Teferi's Protection, Guardian of Faith, Clever Concealment. You can phase yourself out from an exile everything effect. This won't protect your graveyard if you're a Reanimator player, but your board state will at least survive the turn. But if you're playing blue, you've got access to counter spells. You've got access to cheap counter spells like Spell Pierce. Somebody's probably dumping all their mana into the Farewell. The Spell Pierce is probably stopping it. These are also the arguments I've seen from people who play primarily Standard. or play primarily Pioneer, or play primarily Modern. They almost always point to running the counterspells. There's a problem with this argument, though, in Commander. In Commander, we are locked to the colors of our commander choice. If I am playing a cancerous deck like Turgid, sure, Farewell is what I deserve because, again, my parents didn't love me. That's why I'm playing Turgid. But if I'm trying to play any color combination that doesn't involve, white and blue, what are my options? Do I just eat the board wipe and then sit here and wait for the turn to be over? More times than not, if the Farewell is cast at my table, if I do not see in my hand a way for me to advance further, or it's being casted by, say, the Planeswalker player, my options are basically scoop. I'm just going to leave the game, and I'm going to either find another table, or I'm going to play on my phone for a little bit, because at least by taking one person's turns out of the 4-player pod, that game will end a little bit quicker, and hopefully, maybe, that means that we'll be able to get into another game that doesn't have a reset happen in the middle of it. Again, there's a reason Charizard is banned from Magic the Gathering. Charizard makes a sub-game happen, and I'd argue that that's kind of what Farewell is doing in most of the situations that it's in there. Sorry that it keeps flipping between a bunch of different cards, but most of the time, if Farewell's being played, we are just moving to a sub-game of Magic. So, I don't know, that's my thoughts. I think what most of this culminates in, though, is that it's not as simple as the card is just toxic, or the card is not toxic. It has a lot to do with the scenario in which it's played. Most of the time, I find that a card like Farewell is actually fairly toxic. The way that it slows the game down, resets everything, and doesn't advance the board state or the game state of the player who's even playing it, that makes it not feel so great. I understand the need to keep certain decks under control. The Krenko player needs something that will stop everything that he's doing, but generally speaking, destruction effects will do that as well. There are cards like Austere Command that will take care of that as well. You have choices in the type of removal that you put into your deck. You always have choices of the type of cards you have in. For me, ask yourself, what kind of Magic the Gathering game are you trying to play? Do you want something that's done in 4 or 5 turns? Do you want something that's done on turn 20? Whichever decision you decide to make needs to be in line with the kind of game you and your pod are trying to have. If you're trying to have super quick games, the Farewell probably doesn't go into it, because it either slows the games down or it simply won't have a chance to be cast on most board states. If you're trying to have mid-range games, maybe it doesn't go into those ones either, because this will turn all of your mid-length games into longer games. So, I don't know. Figure out which type of game you're trying to play, and that'll tell you whether or not you should be running this card. I do, however, personally find it to be a fairly toxic card myself. Maybe that's because I'm a dirty Reanimator player, and anything that says that I don't get to play Magic the Gathering for the rest of the game, not super fond of it. But let me know what you think in the comments section below. Maybe you've got some opinions on the card that are different than mine. Maybe you're one of those people that thinks that every deck should be blue or white, and we are not restricted to color identity in Commander somehow. Maybe you've got some weird Rule Zero stuff going on. Let me know in the comments section below what you think of Farewell, and what you think of this ongoing conversation that repeats itself about every week or so. As always, everybody, insert end of video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability that Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Blitzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Mabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.